The dusty wheels of the westbound train screeched to a halt, and Evangeline Hartwell stepped onto the weathered platform of copper, ridged with nothing but a battered satchel and a photograph of a man she'd never met. The conductor's voice echoed, "Behind her. End of the line, miss." But as the locomotive pulled away in a cloud of black smoke, she realized she stood completely alone. No familiar face searched the crowd. No weathered rancher stepped forward with recognition in his eyes. The few townspeople who'd gathered to collect packages and mail cast curious glances her way before dispersing into the amber light of late afternoon. Evangeline clutched the letter from Boone Mackenzie tighter, her mail-order marriage arrangement, suddenly feeling as fragile as the yellowed paper in her trembling hands. "Mr. Mackenzie?" She called to a passing cowhand, but he only tipped his hat and continued walking. The empty platform stretched before her like a judgment, and panic began to rise in her throat. She'd sold everything in Boston, burned every bridge to come west to this godforsaken place, and now, "Are you the angel Mama sent?" The small voice startled her. Evangeline looked down to see a girl of perhaps 8 years, with wild auburn curls escaping from beneath a battered hat, and eyes the color of prairie grass. The child's dress was patched but clean, and she held the reins of a paint pony that stamped impatiently in the dust. I beg your pardon?" Evangeline knelt to the girl's level, her heart still racing from the fear of abandonment. "Papa says Mama watches over us from heaven," the girl continued matter-of-factly, studying Evangeline's blue traveling dress and carefully pinned hair. "And yesterday I asked her to send someone who could make Papa smile again. Then today Papa said we might have a visitor, but he rode out to check the north pasture and forgot to come meet you." The pieces began clicking together in Evangeline's mind. Are you Boone Mackenzie's daughter?" "Yes'm." "I'm Clementine Mackenzie, but everyone calls me Clem." The girl extended a dirt-smudged hand with the solemnity of an adult. "Papa's been real sad since Mama died last winter. He cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping." Evangeline's breath caught. Boone had mentioned his wife's passing in their correspondence, but somehow she'd imagined his grief as something distant, already healed. Looking at this brave little girl, she realized she was stepping into a story of loss that was still being written. "Well, Clem," she said, accepting the small hand in hers, "I'm Evangeline Hartwell. I've come from Boston to meet your papa." "I knew it." Clem's face lit up with triumph. "You're too pretty to be just anybody. And you smell like flowers, not like the ladies in town who smell like soap and worry." She tugged Evangeline toward the pony. "Come on, I'll take you home. Papa we'll be back by supper, and Mrs. Weatherby next door taught me how to make biscuits that don't taste like rocks." As Evangeline allowed herself to be led away from the empty platform, she wondered if perhaps this unexpected greeting was exactly what she needed after all. The Mackenzie Ranch sprawled across a valley that seemed to stretch into eternity, with mountains rising like ancient guardians in the distance. But as Clem led Evangeline through the weathered gate, she could see the signs of a man overwhelmed by grief and responsibility. Fences sagged in places, the vegetable garden was overgrown with weeds, and laundry hung crooked on a line that clearly hadn't been properly maintained. The house itself was sturdy but lonely looking, with curtains that hadn't been opened in too long and a porch that bore the scuff marks of a child playing alone. Clem chattered constantly as she unsaddled her pony, filling the silence with observations about everything from the new calf in the barn to her papa's habit of staring at the mountains when he thought no one was watching. "Papa used to sing while he worked," Clem said, leading Evangeline into a kitchen that was clean but sparse. "Now he just whistles sometimes, but it's not the happy kind of whistling. It's the kind that sounds like he's trying to chase away ghosts." Evangeline set down her satchel and looked around the room that was supposed to become her home. Everything spoke of a woman's touch that had been suddenly, cruelly removed. A half-finished embroidery hoop sat on the windowsill, and the spice rack bore handwritten labels in delicate script. This had been Lydia Mackenzie's domain, and Evangeline felt like an intruder disturbing a shrine. "Tell me about your mama," she said gently, settling at the worn kitchen table while Clem bustled about gathering ingredients for their promised biscuits. Clem's hand stilled on the flour sack. She had hair like mine, but Papa always kept it nice in braids. She could make anything grow in her garden, and she sang hymns while she worked. When I had nightmares, she'd sit by my bed and tell me stories about brave princesses who weren't afraid of anything. The girl's voice grew smaller. She got sick right after Christmas. The fever came fast, and Papa rode through a blizzard to fetch Doc Morrison, but she shrugged with the heartbreaking acceptance of a child who'd learned too young that love couldn't conquer everything. Papa blames himself. Says he should have taken her to Denver where there were better doctors. But Mama told me before she died that some things are just God's will, and Papa shouldn't carry guilt that wasn't his to carry. Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes. She'd come west expecting to marry a stranger and build a practical life, but she was walking into the aftermath of a great love story, and she wasn't sure there was room for her in its shadow. The sound of hoofbeats outside made them both look up. Through the kitchen window, Evangeline saw a lone rider approaching, and her breath caught in her throat. Even silhouetted against the setting sun, Boone Mackenzie was unmistakably the man from the photograph, tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his horse like he'd been born in the saddle. But as he drew closer, she could see what the photograph hadn't captured: the weight of sorrow in his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward as if protecting a wound that wouldn't heal. "That's Papa," Clem whispered unnecessarily. "He doesn't know you're here yet." Through the window, they watched him dismount and tend to his horse with methodical precision, every movement speaking of a man going through the motions of living without truly being alive. When he finally turned toward the house, Evangeline saw his face clearly for the first time, weathered and handsome, with kind eyes that held too much pain. "Should I go tell him?" Clem asked, but before Evangeline could answer, Boone Mackenzie stepped through his own front door and stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Boone Mackenzie stood frozen in his own doorway, his hat still in his hands and dust from the trail coating his work clothes. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, moved from his daughter's expectant face to the woman sitting at his kitchen table, and Evangeline saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. "Miss Hartwell," he said, and his voice was rougher than she'd expected, weathered by wind and sorrow. "I forgive me. I lost track of time checking the cattle, and Papa forgot you were coming today," Clem announced cheerfully, apparently unaware of the tension crackling in the air between the two adults. "But I found her at the station all by herself, so I brought her home. We're making biscuits." Boone's jaw tightened, and Evangeline could see him struggling with embarrassment, grief, and something else she couldn't quite name. He was nothing like the confident rancher she'd imagined from his letters. This man looked like he was barely holding himself together, and her revolt had clearly knocked him off balance. "I should have been there," he muttered, running a hand through dark hair that needed cutting. "A gentleman doesn't leave a lady waiting, especially not." He stopped himself, glancing at Clem, and Evangeline realized he'd been about to say, "especially not his bride." "It's quite all right," she said softly, rising from the table. "Clem has been wonderful company. She's told me so much about the ranch and about ... She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "About your wife, about Lydia." The name hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, and for a moment Evangeline thought he might flee. Instead, he set his hat carefully on a peg by the door and turned to face her fully. "Miss Hartwell, I need to speak plainly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I wrote to you, when I placed that advertisement, I thought enough time had passed. I thought I could offer you a proper home, a proper husband. But standing here now, seeing you in her kitchen—" "Papa," Clem interrupted, her young voice sharp with sudden fear. "You're not going to send Miss Evangeline away, are you? She just got here, and she smells like flowers, and she listens when I talk, and Clem, why don't you go check on the chickens?" Boone said gently but firmly. "Make sure they're all in the coop for the night." The girl looked between them with the shrewd eyes of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for survival. "You promise you won't make her leave while I'm gone? Promise on Mama's Bible?" Boone closed his eyes briefly. "I promise we'll still be talking when you get back." After Clem reluctantly left, banging the kitchen door behind her, silence settled over them like dust. Boone stayed by the door as if ready to bolt, while Evangeline remained by the table, her hands folded carefully in front of her. "I can see her everywhere," he said finally. "In every corner of this house, in every sunset, in our daughter's laugh. I thought, God help me, I thought I could just replace what I lost like buying new leather when the old harness breaks. But you're not a harness, Miss Hartwell. You're a woman who deserves better than a man who can't stop loving a ghost." Evangeline felt something crack open in her chest, not heartbreak, but recognition. "Mr. Mackenzie, may I tell you something about why I answered your advertisement?" He nodded, still wary. "I was engaged to a man in Boston, Harold Pemberton III. He was everything my family wanted, wealthy, respectable, from the right social circle. But he was also cold, demanding, and he made it clear that once we married, I would exist solely to enhance his standing in society." She moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his pain. "I broke our engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. My family disowned me, my friends abandoned me, and I realized I would rather risk everything on the possibility of finding real love than settle for a lifetime of elegant misery." Boone's eyes sharpened, focusing on her for the first time since he'd walked in. "I'm not looking to replace anyone," she continued. "I'm looking to build something new." The next morning brought unexpected complications in the form of 3 riders approaching the ranch at full gallop. Evangeline was hanging laundry beside Clem when she heard the thundering hoofbeats, and something in the urgency of their approach made her stomach tighten with dread. Boone emerged from the barn, his face grim as he recognized the lead rider. "That's Sheriff Donovan," he told Evangeline tersely, "and he's got the Weatherby brothers with him. That usually means trouble." The sheriff was a lean man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on foot, but his expression was grave as he approached. "Boone, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Got word from Denver yesterday. There's been some developments." "What kind of developments?" Boone's voice had gone dangerously quiet, and Evangeline noticed how his hand instinctively moved to rest on Clem's shoulder, pulling her closer. Sheriff Donovan glanced meaningfully at Evangeline and Fräulein. "Clem, might be better if we spoke privately. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my family." Boone replied firmly, and Evangeline's heart skipped at being included in that word family. The sheriff sighed. "All right then. Remember that cattle rustling operation we broke up last month? Turns out it was bigger than we thought. Way bigger. And the man behind it all, Jasper Kane, he's been asking questions. Specifically about you, Boone." A chill ran down Evangeline's spine as she saw the blood drain from Boone's face. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he knows you. We're the one who identified his men and helped us track them down," one of the Weatherby brothers interjected. "And word is, he's not the forgiving type." Clem looked up at her father with confusion. "Papa, what are they talking about?" Boone knelt down to his daughter's eye level, his hands steady despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. Remember a few weeks ago when those men were stealing cattle from ranches all over the valley? Well, I saw something that helped the sheriff catch them. You did the right thing, Sheriff Donovan said firmly. But Jasper Kane doesn't see it that way. He's been asking about your family, your property, your routines. The implication hung in the air like a loaded gun. Evangeline felt her mouth go dry as she realized what the sheriff was really saying. Boone and Clem were in danger because he'd stood up for what was right. How much danger are we talking about? She asked, surprising everyone, including herself. By saying we instead of they, Sheriff Donovan studied her with new respect. Hard to say, ma'am. Kane's got a reputation for being ruthless, but he's also smart. He won't do anything that would bring the federal marshals down on him. Still, I'd recommend being extra careful for the next few weeks. Maybe consider sending your daughter to stay with relatives until this blows over. No, Clem's voice was sharp with panic. I'm not leaving Papa, not again. Everyone I love goes away, and I can't. She dissolved into tears that broke Evangeline's heart. Without thinking, she knelt beside Boone and gathered the sobbing child into her arms, meeting his eyes over Clem's head. She's not going anywhere, Evangeline said with quiet determination. None of us are. This is our home, and we'll face whatever comes together. Boone stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Evangeline, you don't understand what you're saying. This isn't your fight. You could leave, go back east where it's safe, and abandon you both when you need help most? She stood, still holding Clem's hand. Mr. Mackenzie, I may be from Boston, but I'm not made of porcelain. I came west to build a new life, not to run at the first sign of trouble. Sheriff Donovan cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but do you know how to use a rifle? I was raised by a father who believed his daughters should be able to protect themselves, she replied calmly. I'm an excellent shot. The surprise on Boone's face would have been comical under different circumstances. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something shifting in his expression. The careful distance he'd been maintaining since she arrived was cracking, replaced by something that looked almost like admiration. Well then, Sheriff Donovan said, tipping his hat, sounds like you folks have things well in hand. But Boone, you keep your eyes open, you hear? And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you send word immediately. After the sheriff and his men rode away, the three of them stood in the dusty yard, united by circumstance if nothing else. Clem still clung to Evangeline's hand, and Boone was looking at both of them with an expression she couldn't quite read. You really meant it, he said finally. About staying, I really meant it, she confirmed. About all of it. 3 nights later, Evangeline woke to the sound of breaking glass and Clem's scream piercing the darkness. She was out of bed and running toward the child's room before her mind fully processed what was happening, her heart pounding with terror and protective fury. Papa! Clem's voice was high with panic, and Evangeline burst through the bedroom door to find the girl huddled on her bed, pointing at the window where jagged glass caught moonlight like scattered stars. A rock the size of a man's fist lay among the shards, with a piece of paper tied around it. Boone appeared in the doorway behind Evangeline, rifle in hand and his hair disheveled from sleep. But his eyes were instantly alert, scanning the room for threats before moving to his daughter. Are you hurt, sweetheart? He crossed to Clem in 3 quick strides, his hands gentle as he checked her for cuts from the flying glass. I'm okay, Papa, but I'm scared, Clem whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. Who would throw rocks at little girls? Boone's jaw tightened as he picked up the paper and unfolded it. In the lamplight, Evangeline could see his face go pale as he read the crude message scrawled across it. What does it say? She asked quietly. Next time it won't be just a rock, he replied, his voice deadly calm. Send the woman away or face the consequences. Rage flared in Evangeline's chest, not fear, but pure, blazing anger at anyone who would terrorize a child to make their point. Well, she said, moving to help sweep up the glass, I suppose that settles it. I'm definitely not going anywhere now. Boone stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Evangeline, you can't be serious. They're threatening you specifically. This is exactly why you should what? Let bullies win? She met his eyes steadily, even as her hand shook with adrenaline. Let them think they can frighten women and children into submission? Not likely. This isn't about principle. It's about staying alive. His voice rose and Clem flinched. Between them, Evangeline immediately softened her tone, reaching out to stroke the girl's tangled curls. Clem, sweetheart, why don't you go sleep in your papa's room tonight? Take your favorite blanket and that little wooden horse he carved for you. After Clem reluctantly left, clutching her belongings, Boone turned to face Evangeline fully. In the lamplight, she could see the fear he'd been trying to hide from his daughter, not just for himself, but for both of them. You don't understand what men like Jasper Kane are capable of, he said quietly. I've seen what he does to people who cross him. The Hendersons lost their ranch after they refused to look the other way when his men were stealing cattle. The widow Morrison had her barn burned down when she testified against one of his associates. And you think running will stop him? Evangeline moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. You think if I disappear, he'll just leave you and Clem alone? Men like that don't stop until they're stopped. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Besides, where would I go? Boston, where my family has disowned me? I have no money for a hotel, no friends to take me in. This ranch, this life we're trying to build, it's all I have now. Something shifted in Boone's expression, the careful walls he'd built around his heart showing cracks. You're not trapped here, Evangeline. I have some money saved, enough to get you settled somewhere safe. I don't want your money, she interrupted firmly. I want to fight for what's ours. The word hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Boone's eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for the fear any reasonable person should feel. Instead, he found only determination. And something that looked remarkably like the fierce protectiveness he felt for Clem. You realize what you're saying, he said slowly. If we stay, if we fight, there's a real chance we could lose everything, including our lives. Evangeline smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it reached her eyes completely. Mr. Mackenzie, I left everything familiar and safe to come west and marry a stranger. If I was going to be sensible, I never would have gotten on that train in the first place. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind rattled the remaining glass in the window frame. But inside, something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer strangers bound by a business arrangement. They were partners facing a common threat. And for the first time since his wife died, Boone Mackenzie felt like he wasn't facing the world alone. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, just as the first rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold. Evangeline was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Too many horses moving too fast to be anything but trouble. Boone! She called, but he was already moving, rifle in hand, his face grim with the knowledge they'd both been dreading. Get Clem and get to the root cellar, he ordered, checking his ammunition with practiced efficiency. There's a rifle down there, loaded and ready. If anything happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you, Evangeline said firmly, moving to the window to peer through the curtains. Her blood chilled as she counted at least 6 riders approaching the house, their faces hard and there intentions clear. But I'm not hiding in a cellar while they try to destroy our home. Our home, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Then his voice hardened. Evangeline, please. I can't protect you both if you're in the line of fire. Then. Don't protect us, she replied, moving to collect Clem from her bedroom. Fight alongside us instead. The riders pulled up in front of the house, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. The man in the lead was tall and lean, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. Evangeline knew instinctively that this was Jasper Kane. Kind of man who'd learned early that cruelty was a tool more reliable than kindness. Mackenzie, Kane called out. We need to have ourselves a conversation. Boone stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not yet aimed. Evangeline positioned herself at the kitchen window where she could see everything, her father's old Winchester steady in her hands. Clem crouched beside her, eyes wide but trusting. Say your piece, Kane, Boone replied, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. Then get off my land. Kane's laugh was ugly. Your land? That's funny, considering you won't be keeping it much longer. You see, Mackenzie, you cost me a lot of money when you helped the sheriff round up my boys. I'm here to collect compensation. The only thing you'll collect here is a belly full of lead if you don't turn around right now, Boone said evenly. Now, that's not very neighborly. Kane dismounted, his men following suit, especially since I'm offering you a choice. Sign over your ranch to cover your debt to me, and I'll let you and your family walk away with your lives. Papa, Clem whispered, tugging on Evangeline's sleeve. What's he talking about? He's talking nonsense, sweetheart, Evangeline murmured back, never taking her eyes off the men spreading out around their property. Your papa doesn't owe anyone anything. Through the window, she could see Boone's stance shift slightly, preparing for what they all knew was coming. I don't owe you anything, Kane, and even if I did, I wouldn't give you so much as a fence post. This land belongs to my family. That pretty little mail-order bride of yours part of the family now? Kane's voice turned mocking. Heard she's got some fight in her. Pity she picked the losing side. That was when Evangeline made her decision. Rising smoothly, she stepped onto the porch beside Boone, her rifle trained on Kane's chest. The surprise on the outlaw's face would have been satisfying under different circumstances. The only thing that's going to be a pity, she said clearly, is how you're going to explain to your men why you let a Boston lady outshoot you. Evangeline, Boone warned under his breath, but she could hear something else in his voice pride. Kane's face darkened. Lady, you're making a serious mistake. No, she replied calmly. I'm making a choice. This is my home, that's my family, and you're trespassing. I suggest you leave before I demonstrate exactly how serious my aim is. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the two groups faced each other across the dusty yard. Then Kane nodded to his men, and everything erupted into chaos. The first shot shattered the morning silence, and Evangeline felt rather than saw Boone dive to cover her as bullets began flying. She rolled behind the porch railing and came up shooting, her father's training taking over as she picked her targets with deadly precision. The battle for the Mackenzie Ranch had begun. The gunfight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke finally cleared, 3 of Kane's men lay wounded in the dust, and the others were retreating at full gallop with their leader clutching a wounded shoulder. Evangeline found herself pressed against Boone behind the overturned kitchen table they dragged onto the porch, both of them breathing hard and covered in splinters from the bullets that had torn through their home. Is everyone all right? Boone called out, his arm still protectively around Evangeline's shoulders. We're fine, Papa. Clem's voice came from the kitchen, where she'd taken shelter as instructed. Miss Evangeline, did you really shoot the bad man? Evangeline looked down at the rifle in her hands, surprised to find them steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I believe I did, sweetheart." Boone stared at her with an expression of wonder and something deeper, something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the gunfight. "Where in God's name did you learn to shoot like that?" "I told you my father believed in teaching his daughters to protect themselves," she replied, setting the rifle aside with careful hands. "He just never mentioned that he'd been a sharpshooter in the war." The sound of approaching horses made them both tense, but these were different, the steady, measured pace of lawmen rather than the wild charge of outlaws. Sheriff Donovan appeared, around the bend with a full posse, their faces grim with purpose. "Heard the shooting from town," the sheriff called as he dismounted. "Everyone all right here?" "We are now," Boone replied, helping Evangeline to her feet. His hand lingered on hers, warm and calloused and completely right. "Kane and his men tried to force us off our land. They weren't successful." Sheriff Donovan surveyed the scene with professional interest, taking note of the wounded men and the bullet holes in the porch. "I'd say they weren't successful at all. In fact, I'd say they bit off considerably more than they could chew." He turned to Evangeline with newfound respect. "Ma'am, I have to say, when I suggested you might need to know how to use a rifle, I didn't expect you to use it quite so effectively." "Neither did I," she admitted, looking around at their bullet-scarred home. "But when someone threatens your family, you do what you have to do." "Your family," Boone repeated softly, and this time there was no question in his voice, only certainty. After the sheriff and his men departed with their prisoners, the three of them stood together in their damaged but still standing home. Clem had finally emerged from the kitchen and was examining the bullet holes with the fascination of a child who just lived through Hearst's real adventure. "Are the bad men coming back?" she asked, tracing a hole in the wall with one small finger. "No, sweetheart," Boone said, pulling her close. "They're going to jail for a very long time. We're safe now." "Good," Clem said with satisfaction. "Because I like Miss Evangeline, and I don't want anyone to make her go away." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this brave little girl who'd already lost so much. "I'm not going anywhere, Clem. Not now, not ever. Promise?" Clem demanded, with the seriousness of a child who'd learned that adult promises weren't always kept. "I promise," Evangeline said solemnly. "On your mama's Bible, if you want." Clem nodded, satisfied, and skipped off to play with her wooden horse, apparently unbothered by the morning's drama. But Boone remained, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Evangeline's face. "You meant that," he said quietly. "About not going anywhere." "I meant all of it," she replied. "About this being our home, about us being a family, about fighting for what matters." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to smell the familiar scent of leather and soap that was becoming as dear to her as breathing. "Evangeline," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need you to know something. When I placed that advertisement, when I wrote to you, I thought I was looking for someone to help me raise Clem and manage the house. I thought I could keep my heart locked away safe, never risk that kind of pain again." His hand came up to cup her cheek, rough and gentle at the same time. "But watching you this morning, seeing you fight for us, for this life we're building together, I realized I don't want to keep my heart locked away. I want to give it to you, completely and forever." Evangeline felt her own heart swell with a joy she'd never expected to find. "Boone Mackenzie, are you asking me to marry you?" "Really marry you? Not just for convenience, but for love?" "I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, Clem's mother, and the keeper of my heart," he said solemnly. "If you'll have a broken-down cowboy who comes with more baggage than a freight train." Her answer was to rise on her tiptoes and kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "I suppose this means we'll need to plan a proper wedding," she said teasingly. "I suppose it does," he agreed. "Think the whole town will come?" "Oh, yes," came Clem's voice from the doorway, where she'd been eavesdropping with no shame whatsoever. "And I get to be the flower girl, and we'll have a big cake and everyone. We'll know that Miss Evangeline is really and truly my mama now." Evangeline looked at this man and this child who'd become her whole world. At this home they defended together and knew that every risk she'd taken to get here had been worth it. She'd come west looking for a new life, and instead she'd found everything she'd never dared to dream of, a love forged in fire, tested by danger, and strong enough to last a lifetime. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains, promising rain for their crops and fresh starts for their hearts. The mail-order bride from Boston was finally, truly home.